Okay, so good morning, everybody. This is Fordham Road Collaborative. I'm Robert Francatelli, and of course, Dennis Kushner for the Kushner Report. We're at Fordham Road Collaborative. We're at fordhamroad.net. You can go to this is the website, the first page, and so you can also click on the Kushner Report, which will look like this. Oh, let me go back. So that's Dennis. By the way, some have asked, as we do these, some have asked about Dennis's, and thank you, Dennis, for doing this, but some have asked about Dennis's sources. We've talked about this. So it's really interesting that he's able to go through a bunch of different sources to bring you this kind of information, this material. I mean, it's just some of the things. Beacon Economics, Co-America Bank, Wells Fargo Bank, Deloitte. Also, of course, we check out the Wall Street Journal regularly. Dennis is an avid, he's adamant about hitting the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, so he's on that site quite a bit. Wharton, Harvard, Bloomberg, Yahoo, et cetera, things like that. So he's able to bring all of these together to give a good sense of trends and things that are going on. So there's very interesting. Also, I want to let you know that we're recording this. This is just for educational purposes, and so if you want to not be recorded, or you have control of your video and audio. And there's an interesting thing. Dennis has been with anybody from FANG. We welcome you this morning. This is the Financial Executives Networking Group. They just announced that Dennis will be appearing with them. Dennis, that's next. It looks like it's next week in San Diego. Well, you're in San Diego, but you are actually in San Diego, and the group is in San Diego. And there's Dennis, consulting partner with Fordham Road Collaborative, and you're going to give pretty much an update, the one that you've been giving on the Kushner Report here. Is that right? You may be on mute.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and I noticed too that there's for FANG members, so that you can get one CPE credit. I thought maybe we ought to be able to do that also with the Kushner Report at some time. So if anybody's interested in continuing professional development, let me know. Maybe I'm also with Santa Clara University. Maybe we can sponsor in some way that. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. We'll also save them for the end of the presentation. And with that, Dennis, you're on.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. Good morning and welcome to the Kushner Report for 2021 February. As Robert indicated at the end of the presentation, we're going to open it for Q&A, and hopefully we'll have a bunch of you ask some questions regarding the content of the presentation today. So let's get started. Let's take a look at the agenda for this morning. Go next. So this morning we're going to talk about, in the agenda, we're going to talk about key economic indicators, the global economy, the domestic economy, mergers and acquisitions, other significant economic news, and what's ahead in 2021. And this month I'm going to focus on mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. So I think that'll be very interesting as we go forward. Next slide. So the key things I want to discuss right now, go back one, will be to look at the key economic indicators. So first of all, on a global perspective for 2021, the GDP is looking more like 5.5%. And we're going to cover, in this area, we're going to cover the unemployment for both the state, the federal government, and the price per barrel of oil. Okay, next slide. Okay, so if you look at the documentation here, for the end of the year, the global GDP is projected to go out at 5.5% and tailing down a little bit in 2022 to 4.2%. The United States is projected to go out at 5.3% this year, and then in 2022 at 5.1%. If you look at the inflation factor, it's going to hedge up a little bit this year at 2.3%, And then we should see that markedly go up to about 2.6% in 2022. As the economy comes back, you'll see increase in prices, et cetera, which will be fine. And then again, it'll be below 3%. The unemployment picture, the unemployment on a national basis is looking at more like 6.2% by the end of this year, and then tailing down a little bit more to 5.2% by the end of 2022. In California, we're looking at 8.6% this year, going down to 6.6% at the end of 22. Now, if you look at the price per barrel of oil, and Mr. Gauci, who's on board now, does a great program with Fordham 2100. The price per barrel of oil is looking more like $57 to $70 a barrel. Now, that's predicated on one, increasing demand, especially from China, Korea, and those other outlying areas are going to be a tremendous demand for oil products. And the real key is whether or not we're going to see an increase in production during the year. That'll have a major impact on the price per barrel of oil. Okay, next slide. So let's take a little bit of a look at the global economy. Well, uncertainty is in the short term, but longer term, it's much more encouraging. The trend basically has shown mixed trends for major foreign countries, stemming from a renewed use and impact of the coronavirus and the new variants. However, China's economy continues to outperform the rest of the world, especially in the latter part of 2020, and they'll be strong again in 2022 and 21. Australia and New Zealand appear to be holding on as coronavirus clusters appeared largely contained now at this point. Canada, on the other hand, they've seen an increase in their cases recently, and their economy is projected to have a downturn for the first quarter of 2021. If we look at Mexico, they continue to face challenges. Their economy in the fourth quarter, over the fourth quarter of 2020, was down 4.5%. They continue to struggle. South Korea is making headwinds as their economy in the fourth quarter grew at 1.1%. In other words, annualized, it's 4.4%. So they're doing very well. Keep in mind, a great deal of their economy is based upon exports. And also in South Korean marketplace, we're seeing stronger demand for their products. Norway, again, had 5 strong consecutive months in economics. At the end of the year, they grew very strongly, and they're projecting to be 2.5% growth year over year. Brazil, on the other hand, continues to face problems. It's difficult times there. Indicators reveal a pronounced downturn in their economy again. They've had a tremendous amount of problems dealing with inflation over the past several years, and they were hoping that the stimulus package of the central bank would curtail some of that, but it's still out of control. So they're going to struggle throughout the year. Now, turning to the United States, this is kind of interesting. Expect the second quarter to boom for the United States. As you know, we're coming to the last few days of February. We'll enter March, which will be the last month of the first quarter. And it's projected that it probably will be relatively flat, even possibly negative. Nobody really knows for sure yet until sometime in April. But as we move into the second quarter, we're seeing more businesses beginning to open. We're seeing the COVID virus curtailing death rates, et cetera. And we're seeing more vaccine available in the marketplace. Hopefully by next week, we'll see an impact with Johnson & Johnson's vaccine as well. So if you look at where we are right now, the real GDP, as I said earlier, is projected to grow about 5.3% this year and then 5.1% the following year. Now, the real key here, and it's still unknown yet, is whether or not Congress will agree in March on a new stimulus package, somewhere between $1 trillion and $2 trillion. And again, hopefully something will happen by the middle of March. Keep in mind, the U.S. consumer will lead the charge back to growth and rebound in the mix going forward because of the stimulus package, money they've spent, and we also starting to see an increase in growth in the marketplace in the job area. The good news is this morning, the first-time filers for unemployment were down over 100,000, so that's a positive feature of what we're seeing right now. So looking ahead, what I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time on mergers and acquisitions. A number of you have asked about that. So there are a variety of economic and governmental and medical factors that will dictate the activity in 2021 in the acquisition market. We expect to see a lot of megatrends deals taking place, somewhere around $5 billion and above. You know, mergers and acquisitions are both changes in control of companies that involve combining organizations, and there are operations of multiple entities into one single company or organization. So firm valuations will be increasing this year as the pandemic lows are behind us. And we'll see those company multiples increasing across the board. Keep in mind, since the recession of 2008, companies have experienced modest growth and have actively turned toward targeting and acquiring other companies to increase revenues and market share. There's been a real struggle with organic growth. What is an acquisition? Well, essentially, it's defined as a corporate transaction where one company purchases a portion or all of another company's shares or assets. A lot of benefits can be derived from an acquisition. So, for example, you can reduce entry noises. But with an M&A, a company is able to enter into new markets and product lines instantaneously, with brand recognition and with a good reputation for an existing base of business. The market power is essential. In other words, an acquisition can help to increase market share of your company quickly. And it's also excellent in terms of getting a competitive advantage in the marketplace as they move forward in the market. New competencies and resources, companies can choose to take over the other businesses and gain competencies and resources as it does not have currently. A good example of that is Cisco Systems in the Bay Area. Over the last 20 years, when they found out they were missing something to add to their portfolio business, instead of making it internally, they go out and buy the business, fully integrated into their system. They've been very, very successful over the last 25 years. Access to experts, this is key. So small businesses will join with larger businesses and they'll be able to have access to specialists such as financial, legal, and human resource specialists. Access to capital, again, after an acquisition, the access to capital grows stronger and it's much more improved. You also have fresh ideas and perspectives on things. In other words, you can put together a team of experts with fresh perspectives and ideas who are passionate about the business and reaching its goals. However, grow your business and increase revenue and acquire a complementary company that is able to contribute to your income. However, there's often culture clashes. That is, a company usually has its own distinct culture that has been developed since inception, and the acquiring company has a culture that may conflict with the company being acquired, which becomes problematic. Employees and managers from both companies, as well as their activities, may not integrate successfully. And that's been one problem that's plagued acquisitions over decades. Duplication of efforts. Acquisitions often lead to the time when we see a duplication of efforts and duties within the company. For example, human resources. Maybe there's two departments, or there's two departments in pricing. And what happens? You've got to consolidate to streamline those activities, and therefore those people get displaced. Conflicting objectives. This is another major issue. Companies involved in the acquisition may have distinct objectives in operating individually before. Now, what happens, for example, one company may want to expand market share while the other one wants to look at cutting costs. So those things have to get in alignment. Poorly matched businesses. Here's a good example. A business that doesn't look for expert advice when trying to identify the most suitable company, to acquire another targeted company. And here's a good example, Verizon. As you remember, they bought AOL and Yahoo, and that's been a real problem for Verizon since the acquisition took place. You also have pressure on suppliers. Following the acquisition, the capacity of suppliers may not be enough to provide additional services, supplies, or materials. So you're stuck with that. This could also have a major impact on production if you're in the manufacturing business. And then, of course, we have what we call brand damage. M&A may hurt the new image of the company or damage the existing brand. So the evaluation is whether the two companies should keep the brands separate. If you go back some time ago, IBM began divesting themselves of a lot of the hardware. So they spun off, for example, their PC business, and it went to Lenovo. And people were buying Lenovo PCs. And I know for a fact in Silicon Valley, keyboards were popping out and they changed the way they were making the product. It really caused a brand problem for IBM, for the name IBM going forward. So that's a perfect example. So what's a merger? Well, a merger is really referred to when two companies decide to merge and combine and become one legal entity. There's a number of these types of deals. First of all, you have a horizontal merger. That's when the companies, their direct competitors operate in the same market. Good example would be like Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Then you have a vertical merger, which they operate along the same supply chain. Here's an example where a car manufacturing company, for example, GE or GM rather, would buy a tire company. And then you have market extension, where companies often provide a comparable product and service, but operate in different markets. Pepsi buying Pizza Hut in 1977. We have product extension, where the merging company offers another product in line of their own to complement it. So you have a company like Hellmann's Mayonnaise buying a large olive oil company and therefore blending it in with future products. And then finally, you have a conglomerate merger. That is where a major company with different products and services buys another firm. As you recall, Walt Disney, they bought American Broadcasting. So there's a lot of benefits to be derived from the overall process. And one of them is the financial results to be achieved. Of course, the impact on channels of distribution. We have obtaining synergies and processes, people and technologies, increasing revenue, obviously, pricing strategies, and reinforcing old and new customer relationships. To me, that's critical. When you buy a company, it's absolutely critical that you retain your current customer base as well as the customers that belong to the acquired company. And then, of course, you want to gain competitive advantage in the marketplace. What we're seeing today is, and you're going to see more of it this year, are corporate divestitures. That's where a strategy is deployed to remove some of the business units that no longer fit into your strategy. A good example is GE and Northrop are divesting pieces of their businesses to move in a different direction. As you recall, GE has probably gotten rid of all the appliance businesses that they've had since day one. And Northrop is paring a lot of products that they don't no longer need, such as in the IT area, focusing more on in the black box area. So the one thing that comes down to mind is if you're involved in M&A, and that is when you decide to acquire a company, you must consider buying the company for the right reason. And that is often companies are targeted and acquired for the wrong reason, leading to difficult outcomes, in some cases a pure disaster. So the acquiring company has to rationalize the deal, which can be based on irrelevant data and rationale. So let me give you an example. For those of you that were around in the mid-70s, Mobil Oil was flush with cash. And what do? They bought Montgomery Ward in 1976. And over time, in the 90s, Montgomery Ward disappeared. And that was because of competition from Walmart and Target. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an overview of the M&A process. So let's go on to the back to the one slide on the economic indicators. Okay. Keep going forward.
Forward, Dennis?
Yeah, forward. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Here we go. So as I mentioned earlier about inflation, that's always a concern. Now, January, the inflation rate was up 1%, and that's primarily because gasoline prices rose substantially. And again, keep in mind that we'll see what happens as the rest of the year unfolds relative to the access to oil in the United States as well as on the world marketplace. Trade exports were up again in December to $185 billion, which is good, while imports decreased by $295 billion. Unfortunately, the trade deficit, again, was around $66.7 billion in December, which is really a problem for the United States. You go back several months ago and we were down in the 50 range, and hopefully we can get back to that one of these days. Retail sales in January burst of higher. It was great, good month because people were taking the checks that they got from the federal government and spending money. We saw sales in general were up 5.3%, and if you take out the purchase of automobiles, it was up 5.9%. So we're looking for a pretty strong, robust sales season for the year, somewhere around 2.3% on a level basis. What I'd like to do now, if we take a look, for example, at the areas of employment, the job market, what happened last month. Go to that next slide. So the key is we saw payrolls increase in January by 49,000, while the unemployment rate declined to 6.3%. If you think back to December, it was negative growth and the unemployment rate was much higher. So hopefully we're seeing the better part of the economy growing as we move further. The real key is business and financial services. They continue to have strong returns. This is the 6th month in a row we've seen a positive in jobs created. We look at government, added 43,000. The real concern is looking at leisure and hospitality. Again, it was down 61,000. There's over 700 jobs to date lost in that particular area. And it's going to be a long time before we see that really come back to where it was before the pandemic. And the other area, we saw a decline in manufacturing to a degree. But again, retail was also a problem during the month as well. And so that's going to continue to rear itself for the time being. Okay, next slide. Now, here's the problem with the report here. The California report is usually released by Beacon Economics, usually in the middle of the month, around the 20th of the month. And unfortunately, the data wasn't available for the time of my report. So we'll have better information regarding February when I do my March presentation. Okay, next slide. So now if we look at, for example, if we look at factory orders, another good month, 1.1% growth, which is substantial. Basically, we're seeing that continue for the last 7 months in a row. We've had an increase in factory orders, which is very good. Now, small business confidence level, again, dropped down to 95 in January. It's been below 100 for the last 3 months. The real benchmark is at 100. And hopefully we'll see that pick up as the economy improves as we go into the second, third, and fourth quarters. Small business confidence level, again, was below the same level. They were 95 again. Still, at this point, it's almost a 7-year low since the last time we've been at this level. Consumer confidence, again, is below. It was at 89.3 in the month of January. It's still flat, but it's still below the 100. So the index is really for 100 and above. Crude oil prices, what we saw here happening is if you go back a few months ago, the prices were somewhere around $37 a barrel for West Texas crude intermediate. And last week, the crude prices were at $59.24. And that's up $8 since January. So we'll see what happens as we move forward. And as I said earlier, the new projections are somewhere between $57 and $70 a barrel. Now let's take a look at housing starts. Housing starts fell 6% in January following an 8.2% increase in the prior month. But again, keep in mind that the rush to start a lot of the home building stopped because of little problems they've had in the marketplace with the weather. However, builders have held off because some of the projects, they've seen a spike in the lumber products over the last couple of months. So that should start turning around as we move into February and March. Home sales in general, we're up 13% in January. Again, more evidence of a hot marketplace for the real estate market. So let's take a quick look at the home sales that occurred in Southern California. So in Los Angeles in the month of January, sales price rose 12.6% for the median price to $690,000, while sales were up 14.3%. Orange County, which is really the bellwether of Southern California, prices were up 6.7% for the midpoint to $799,000. And sales, of course, were up 22%. And then looking at San Diego, the midpoint was up 9.4% to $640,000, and sales were up about 10%. So existing home sales were up about 0.6 of a point in January. Looks pretty modest at this point. However, from year to year, from January of 2021 to January of 2020, sales were up 23.7%. So it was a very stellar year. Looking at productivity, the reports usually come out once a quarter. However, overall productivity, which really represents the amount of work per hour of output, dropped 4% in the fourth quarter of 2020. This marks the worst decline since 1981. And hopefully by the time we get into April, we'll have better results. You know, looking at company displacements, I hate to use the word layoffs. I've only looked at those companies that have significant impact in the economies. So FedEx eliminated 6,300 jobs in Europe. United Airlines in the United States lost another 14,000. And we had Heineken, the beer manufacturing company, dropped 8,000 jobs. And then American Airlines, another 1,000. So it is slowing down in terms of the massive that we've seen layoffs by companies, and hopefully we'll see that that change being more relevant as we go further into the year. Now what I'd like to do is I want to talk about some specifics around mergers and acquisitions. So first of all, we have a company called BuzzFeed, and what that is, it's an internet digital media company out of New York that started in 2006. They're just buying HuffPost from Verizon. And what's taking place now, there's more marketing shakeups taking place in the news media industry. You'll see that also happening in the areas of communications with all of the news media. So for example, the Chicago Tribune is making noise to go out and buy more. Organizations are looking at buying possibly the Los Angeles Times, San Diego Times also. So we'll see more of this happening going down the road. Platinum Equity is buying Ingram Micro. This is a Los Angeles-based private equity company that's buying Micro and Acro for $7.2 billion. Now, Ingram Micro has 35,000 employees and operates in 60 countries. What do? They provide primarily services in the cloud, mobility, and enterprise computing. Now, this marks the deal as this year's largest disposal by a Chinese company to an overseas buyer. This is kind of an exception. Usually they're buying American companies or companies from other countries. We're still on M&A. And so the divestiture, again, is streamlining their business so that therefore they're going to focus on different areas as they go forward. As you recall, they moved out of Los Angeles a few years ago, and their headquarters are now in McLean, Virginia, where they want to focus on a lot of Black area contracts. Evergreen Coastal Capital and Veritas is offering to buy Cubic, which is a defense contractor, for $2.8 billion. That deal will go through by the end of June. And then if you look at the transportation sector, there's a company in the rail sector called CSX is acquiring New England Regional Plan. It's called Pan Am Railways. And what this is going to do is going to reshape the airline, rather than the railroad industry in the northern part of New England. Now, if you wonder why the name Pan Am came from, as you recall, Pan American Airlines went under several years ago. So Pan Am Railways purchased the logo and the name in 1998. That's why it's called Pan Am Railways. Now we look at Hyundai, which has been very active in the acquisition market. Hyundai is acquiring Boston Dynamics for $1.1 billion. And the purpose is to access a wider range of technologies that it can use to expand in logistics and robot offerings. In the biotech space, Thermo Fisher, which is a San Diego-based company, is acquiring Mesa Biotech for $550 million. This is a leading point of care diagnostic testing platform that detects infections in SARS, influenza A and B, and other respiratory areas as well. And then you've got Boston Scientific is buying Providence Solutions for $925 million. And what Providence does is they're involved in mobile cardiac services, including ambulatory cardiac monitors and so forth. As you recall, that cardiovascular issues is the #1 leading disease on the global basis. And then we look at a company called Uber, which is a well-known household name these days. They've decided to buy Drizzly for $1.1 billion. So Drizzly is a leading on-demand alcohol, beer, wine, and spirits marketplace in the United States. And it's available to over 1,400 cities in the United States. So what it's going to do is the merchants will be able to benefit from Uber's best-in-class routing technology and significant consumer base. So that'll help Uber and the people working there to have another source of revenue. Kraft Heinz is selling Planters, corn nuts, and branch to Hormel for $3.4 billion. Again, another divestiture. Now let's take a look at what other significant items are taking place in the economy. Next slide, Robert. So Microsoft is becoming more active these days. They're among the top leading groups investing money in the automobile industry. What they've decided to do is invest $2 billion into the driverless effort technology startup Cruise. And the idea is to roll out autonomous vehicle services over the next few years. So they're getting more involved in other areas of business outside of just software and hardware. The operator, the Queen Mary, filed bankruptcy. For those of you who have ever visited the Queen Mary, it's a relic. It's been around for decades. And we're seeing what's happening now is, and there's several other hotel chains, 26 other hotel chains are on the brink of filing bankruptcy. Office Depot and Staples have been battling for a number of years. Office Depot has rejected the latest offer by Staples for consolidation. However, they are talking about doing some type of strategic alliance relationship business going forward. And General Motors has announced a new line of electric vehicles. You may recall they said recently that they're getting out of the automobile business using traditional gas-powered cars, going all electric by 2035. Jaguar announced last week that they're going all electric by 2025, and they plan on having a full range of electronic vehicles by 2030. And every year at this time, the United States Post Office always comes out with an announcement. The announcement is they're planning to raise rates and slow down first-class mail. So the idea is that last year they suffered a $9.2 billion operating loss. So the plan is right now, if it's approved, will be to eliminate tier 1 first-class mail and letters and bills to probably going out 2 days later as opposed to the 1 day, and possibly thinking about getting rid of Saturday deliveries. So this is on the table right now to see what happens. So that kind of takes us through where we are. What I'd like to do now is open it up to Q&A. You're on mute. Yeah, Dan, unmute yourself.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What's the word on with the United States printing so much money?
Well, I'll tell you what, the Federal Reserve just talked about that the other day. At this point, the dollar is weakening, as you know. But given where we are in the economy, I think what we have to do is generate more business and getting more income out. I think that if they can get another stimulus package out, it's going to help get the economy moving forward. And I think that's what's critical right now. So to me, I think down the road, we're going to have a problem with the debt. As you know, we're going to have to pay for it. But I think right now, we're in a position where the triage says we've got to get more money into the economy to stimulate growth.
Well, the Democrats' proposal seems to be wrought with pork and not really anything to help the economy.
Well, I think at this point, we'll have to wait and see what happens. I'm hoping something will get settled probably by the middle of March.
Do you think there's any chance that Biden will back off on the cancellation of the oil pipelines?
I don't know what they're going to do. That's still up in the air, too. There's a lot of discussions going on in that area. Ed Snyder,
Thanks,
are you there? You're welcome. Ed?
Yeah.
Your
Can
thoughts?
you hear me, Dennis?
Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, as you know, I'm in venture capital now, and for the last 30 years, I've been doing startup companies, mostly up in Silicon Valley. We've got 7 investments. 5 are rocking and rolling beautifully. I think it really is an interesting acceleration of the trend and use of the internet has occurred. In fact, the fact that we're on Zoom is a perfect example of that. All of our companies are involved in infrastructure, mostly software, which enables using big data, the cloud, and communicating with Internet of Things. So we see our companies, our portfolio companies, growing at terrific rates, particularly the ones around the cloud. On the other hand, if I start looking at if I look at things like retail, which we've been talking about in various venues, Dennis, for the last 4 or 5 years, I see an acceleration in their problem, which is, why in the world would I get, if I know what I'm going to buy, why would I go out and go to a store? And you know, so I'm thinking that some of these things in the economy that are not doing very well, I guess this is a quicker death blow. Am I off the wall here? I mean, I look at shopping malls. I mean, why? I haven't been to a shopping mall since the pandemic. On the other hand, I probably bought more stuff since I've been sitting around looking at my screen than I ever have in the last 10 or 20 years. So, I mean, we're seeing some pretty dramatic changes. And I also want to throw out electric cars. being a car buff and owning a lot of conventional so-called sports cars, isn't this a giant pipe dream? I mean, has anybody run the numbers on how much more electric demand there will be in California when all the cars are electric?
No.
We already have a capacity issue here.
Well, let me tell you what I think there's a fundamental issue with electric, and that is that for those of us that came from Silicon Valley, it's very electric. There are a lot of electric vehicles up there. There's a city called Cupertino, which is not far from where I lived in Los Gatos. And what happened is they kept having brownouts because they did not have the infrastructure to accommodate the requirements for all the electrical needs. So my point is will we have the support and infrastructure capable in California if we decide to move away from gasoline vehicles to all electric? That's going to be a fundamental issue. And I mean, that's a concern we have. So I think that's a problem. I mean, I don't know whether or not they're going to eliminate all automobiles by 2035, but don't forget about our friends at Mobil Oil and Exxon and Chevron and et cetera. You know, they're pretty large and pretty influential. So it's going to be hard to tell whether or not you'll be able to put them out of business. I mean, I think reusable new energy is going to be a key fundamental factor going forward. But at the same time, you got to think about infrastructure. That's the real key.
Yeah, and that's the business I've been in. Just to give you a little of my background, when I first came out to California in the 70s after the Navy and grad school, I went to work for a company that's now part of Northrop Grumman called TRW. And I worked in renewable energy. And, you know, these are solar, geothermal, and things like that, which we never got anywhere near to economic viability. They were always a government plaything.
Sure.
Now, apparently, we somehow have jumped over that problem, whatever that means. And apparently we're going full bore for all these alternate forms, most of which have a cycle, like solar is off in the middle of the night and wind only generates when the wind blows. So I guess I wonder, you know, we finally got over the energy crisis, which we lived through in the 70s with gas rationing by developing our petroleum reserves and ability to extract. And now that problem went away, and now we've created, I think, a worse problem, which you now saw in Texas, which is utilities that can't meet demand. And I really wonder what that's going to do for us overall. I mean, if we lose the internet, I think our whole economy comes to a grinding halt, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, I agree. David Gauci had a program. It's called Fordham 2100. And David, you're on. Do you want to make? Would you like to inject some comments?
Sure. First of all, it's Forum 2100. It's not Fordham.
Sorry, Forum 2100.
Okay. I think that's a disease. Everybody's calling everything to Fordham. Well, I think these are really interesting points that are being raised. A couple of things come to mind. First of all, worldwide, there seems to be a very strong push to electrify everything. But there are, as I think you're alluding to, a number of the people here are alluding to, there are kind of conflicting goals. And Texas, the recent experience in Texas kind of reveals a weakness. If we become over-reliant on electricity as sort of the dominant source of energy, my goodness, if it fails, how dependent are we on digital technologies? And if we're going to try to transform the transportation sector to being electricity, what does that actually do? Actually, we've done a little study on New Jersey that if Elon Musk's goals are achieved, then a typical New Jersey household would actually incur about a 20% bump up in terms of kilowatt hours they consume per month. And so if you project that out to what the infrastructure requirements would be, they're formidable in terms of investment. But this also begs the question as to whether or not the infrastructure as it's designed right now and as it has operated for the last 100 some odd years is the appropriate architecture, or if we should be thinking out of the box here and having distributed electricity generation, for example. There are movements toward this, but there are other solutions to trying to reach the goal of low emissions or lower carbon that don't depend upon wind or solar. And we already have them. And I suspect the fellow, is it Ed Snyder from TRW, would probably know this quite well. Things that actually the oil and gas companies actually have the capability of producing right now, things like ammonia, which is NH3, which has no carbon in the molecule. You can produce it green. You could use wind to generate the electricity to achieve the electrolysis, for example. There are plenty of solutions. So I get a little frustrated with the public discourse coming out of Washington. Anyway, but that's more than you probably wanted to know. But thanks, Dennis.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. Again, it's just a case where it seems that no sooner do we solve a problem, as in the supply of petroleum, than we create another problem, which I'm not even sure exists, which is carbon, which has nothing to do with anything we worked on in the 70s. And even the terminology that's being used, renewable energy versus zero carbon emissions. A lot of renewable energy, for example, burning leftover cooking oil has got more carbon emissions than you can shake a stick at. And yet there are people that are running around doing that because they think it's a good idea. One last comment on all that stuff is that those of us that have lived in California in apartments and been subjected to electric heating, where you turn on a switch and you have this coil in the wall that glows. You ever experienced an electric home? I don't know where the money's coming from for people to pay for the level of electricity required for electric heating. I mean, they're starting in San Francisco to ban restaurants from using gas to cook. And, I'm an engineer by training, and I love thermodynamics, fluid mechanics, and all these classic things. And I start looking at why in the world you want to spend all of your time figuring out how you can basically burn electricity after you've already generated it. You're running into efficiency levels that are stratospheric. I mean, it's almost nuts again. I mean, it seems like we never learned from history. I mean, in the 70s, I moved into an all-electric home. Fortunately, they lied. We had gas heat, and so I had the little button which I saved, my doorbell button, called a gold medallion home. But the last thing in the world I would want if I were trying to have any kind of economic security is a gold medallion home with electric heating. I mean, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but when I moved out here, there was so little insulation in my new house that I was colder than I was when I moved from Boston. I was quite warm in the winter because we understood that, you'd freeze to death if you didn't take care of insulation. So it's taken me 30 years to get my house up to spec to where it's got some decent insulation with double pane, triple pane windows and all that stuff. And it just blows me away that we're talking about inefficiencies beyond all belief in terms of generation, transmission, and reuse of electricity to heat things. And there seems to be no ability to do an engineering compromise in today's world. You've got these wacky politicians running around thinking that electricity is great. I wonder what they're going to do. I mean, look at Germany with their Dieselgate. In fact, you didn't mention with Volkswagen. Volkswagen's having a hell of a problem competing with Elon Musk because cars are not software platforms.
Right.
If you've been in a Tesla, it's a software platform. It's not a car. And Volkswagen is having a hell of a time because they haven't got the ability to reliably upgrade the software in their new electric vehicles. And by the way, ask yourself this question. You got a guy who's a software guy, namely Elon Musk, who's got a company that's probably worth more than all the automotive valuations in the world, who's spitting out things that I guess eventually will be very successful. But what about transportation? I mean, electric cars today, I lived in Colorado. It's like electric car land. And why is that? Because the median income up there is probably $500,000 a year. I mean, and they not only that, they subsidized all these Teslas. You got the average worker type person, even in Amazon, for example, is making like 45 grand a year. How are they gonna afford all this electricity? Because California, if you use more than your basic amount, they slam you with it, right? You guys have seen the scale of electric pricing. I mean, sooner or later, this thing is gonna, the wheels are gonna come off of this vehicle in a very unpleasant way.
Well, one of the things to keep in mind is that San Diego Gas and Electric is famous for their pricing, and they've got different tiers of pricing. So, for example, more people are moving to solar, let's say in San Diego, and that means they still have infrastructure and costs with San Diego Gas and Electric. Well, they have to make money. They're going to continue to raise the rates. So you've got that because they're not going to get rid of people. They're not going to cut back on the services. So it's a catch-22. We will have tier pricing once we go to daylight savings, I believe it is. For example, if you were to do your laundry and everything from 12 at night till 6 o'clock in the morning, it's something like 17 cents a kilowatt. And then it goes up to like 30 cents and then 45 cents between 4 and 9 o'clock at night. So, you can do whatever you want to do, but you're going to pay a premium depending on what your source is. Now, you buy an electric car and plug it in, guess what that's going to do to your electric bill at home? I mean, that's the problem.
Well, you mentioned something else that bothers me. So you get a discount for using electricity when there's no solar power.
Right.
How long is that going to last? I mean, it's exactly the opposite problem that we have.
Yeah.
Which is,
exactly.
Your pricing as low as possible at the hardest time to deliver solar energy.
Right.
The sun's not out at night. At least the last time I checked when I was observing sunspots, it was not out at night. So, I mean,
By the way, I wanted to go back and address the comment you made earlier, and that was on the retail sector.
Yeah.
And the retail sector is struggling, and it's going to struggle for a long time. Now, there are places such as in Orange County where one of the malls lost a couple of the major players. I think it was like Sears or Macy's had closed. What they're trying to do is add more restaurants in the mall areas now. They're trying to add, for example, they added a postal annex in one of the malls in Orange County. So they're trying to figure out what can they do to reuse the space being left by companies that are either closing or moving out of those areas. And that's a real problem for the space. In San Diego, if you go to the Oceanside area, you've lost Sears and you've lost some others, and the parking lots are vacant. But they've opened up a lot of small restaurants where you can eat either indoors or outside. So you've got a real dilemma. What's going to happen to all the malls?
I think they're going to become Amazon distribution centers.
That's right.
I mean, I don't understand what people are talking about retail. I mean, it's gone, isn't it? I mean, it's not over yet, but I mean, look at this. We've been talking about Sears for as long as I can remember. I mean, when I was a kid and we lived in Los Alamos, we used to order crap out of the Sears catalog because there weren't any stores.
Well, let me tell you something. As of last week, I saw something that says there's only 120 Sears left out of something like 4,000 that go back a few years ago. There's only 120 left. And Macy's has been on the rocks. They did a little bit better this quarter. They're trying to downsize and get out of the malls. But Hudson Bay continues to look at them. That's a Canadian-based company to buy them. So I think at some point in time they're gonna disappear also. And the question is, where do you buy things? Well, you can't buy everything on the internet.
What can't you buy, Rick? I just ordered some. What can't you buy?
Yeah.
I mean, what can't you buy from Amazon with free shipping?
No, I think it's great. If you buy something that doesn't work, you send it back.
I don't get it. I mean, you can sit here and talk about retail, but as you said, restaurants, which unfortunately had a hell of a time in the last year, as you probably know.
Sure.
I'm still in LA. I'm in LA County. We still don't have indoor dining. In fact, I think in desperation, the Gav fired up outside dining because he knows he's going to get deposed here shortly. But fundamentally, we haven't been able to go to an indoor restaurant in LA County since March of last year.
Yeah.
So if you're in the restaurant business, and I mean, I talk to these guys whenever I go to pick up food. I do a lot of pickup food. I'm not afraid to go get it, and they're all struggling. I mean, and it has nothing to do with technology or the economy. It has to do with the shutdown. I mean, I don't think any of those people. I mean, we have malls, little malls here in the greater Torrance area, which are like ghost towns. I mean, they used to be full of little restaurants, little stores. I mean, we got one that's got one. It's got a an auto parts store is the last thing left out of about 10 stores, and a couple of restaurants. I think we've really seen a change, and I don't think it's all bad. I mean, as somebody who sees the change around the use of the web, and I've watched this since it was a DoD tool at TRW, which nobody knew what it was, and then thanks to Al Gore, he invented the web, and we now have the this new wonderful thing. But I mean, again, if you're not going to be able to use what's going to increase productivity, why do you expect the increase in productivity?
Oh, I agree.
Retail is gone. I mean, I don't even understand why we talk about it. It's like selling produce that's spoiled. I'm sorry, I have a pretty negative view of it. I hope there's nobody who's a retail guy who's all excited, who's insulted. But I think we're living in an amazing transition, and I think when we come out of this pandemic, you're going to see a very different. You're going to see a different economy.
Yeah, I mean, we're going through what I'll use the term industrial revolution for the sake of discussion. I mean, we're going through radical changes, and I think we'll see what happens. How do you define our economy in 2 or 3 years from now? What is it? What does it look like? What industries have prevailed? Which ones have stayed? In LA, they said that there's over 15,000 businesses are gone. 15,000. Wow. And I can tell you that I was told that in San Diego County that 60% of the restaurants that closed in San Diego County will never open again. I mean, that's kind of where we are. So what happens to the people? What are they going to do differently? So people that live and work in the leisure space are going to really have a problem. And if David, the key here is how do you retrain people to move into other areas to get jobs and going forward? What are you going to do about that? What do we do to retrain people?
Oh, you teach them right code.
Yeah. But in California, the economy is not projected in the job market to come back until 2023. California typically is the last state to go into a recession, and we're the last state to come out of a recession. And that's just been the way it's been for years. And that's a problem.
One last comment, and I'll turn it over to everybody else. I was stunned and amazed at your forecast for GDP growth.
Yep.
I mean, is this all a figment of these subsidies, or what is it? I mean, we were struggling to keep it above 3%. Now you're talking over 5%.
But you got to consider where we were negative going the other way. So it's look at negative growth, and then you start growing, and so you're going to go up 5%. But where were we from before? That's what we're talking about going over the next 9 months. Not the first quarter. But I mean, think about the volume of activity, people going back to work, spending money. There's going to be it's going to be an increase, and then it'll flatline as we go forward. But right now, you've got, I don't know, millions of people that can't do anything, can't spend anything.
Yeah.
So I think you're going to see an increase across the board in industries going forward over the next several months.
Dennis, we've got just a few minutes left. So Dan has been trying to ask a question.
Dan, you have a question,
Are
Dan?
you able to? Do you have audio?
Yeah, I do. I'm sorry. Before I was having some screen issues. Just a couple of factual questions I may have missed. Denny, you showed the expected U.S. unemployment rate the end of this year and then the end of next year, 2022. But I missed, where are we starting from? What was the unemployment rate at the end of 2020?
I think at the end of 2020 was somewhere around it was around 8%.
Okay,
8%.
That makes sense. Okay, another question is you mentioned that you would foresee the price of oil being between, I think it was 57 and 70 bucks a barrel.
Yep.
And then you said that assumes that supply is able to keep up, and there's an implication in that statement that supply may not be able to. Do you really anticipate any questions in supply not being there as the economies around the world pick up?
Well, let me tell you what, our friends in Iran made a comment on Monday, and that is they're going to start increasing production.
Right.
They are going to increase production, and Saudi Arabia and all of our other friends, Russia, etc. At some point in time, if they want cash
That's right.
to survive, they're going to have to produce oil. And that's based on demand. And as we said the other day, that China is the #1 user of oil products in the world right now.
Right.
And they finished the economy last year. They came out positive. and they're going to grow, and they're going to do whatever they have to do. So they're going to demand more oil products. And the same thing we're going to see with Japan and Korea, South Korea. So those markets in general are going to really require more spending, more demand. And so that's what I think will happen. So if they don't do that, as unfortunately David's off the program, but on Monday, this individual that was talking on Forum 2100 said that worst case is he doesn't think that we'll ever see $100 a barrel again. I hope he's right.
And I think the implication with that is that the supply will in fact be there.
Yeah.
Because Russia does need, for its own economic purposes, to continue to export. Saudi Arabia does as well. So I would anticipate that I would think that the supply will in fact be able to keep up with demand in the next couple of years.
It's just a question of when they decide to start increasing the utilization of oil. That's the real key. We don't know that yet. And again, as we move into the second quarter this year and people start going back to work, and like Sid can say, you'd see more people driving cars and being out doing things, and everybody starts getting the vaccine and things start going to somewhat of a normalization, you're going to see more activity taking place. Now, I have a friend of mine that they were going to go on a cruise from the United States to Canada, and they were told the Canadian government said they're not going to let cruise ships go into Canada from the United States until June of 2022. So, I mean, 2022.
Interesting.
So, I mean, like I said, that could change tomorrow. But the key right now, look, the airline industry is barely afloat, okay? And the hotel industry, I mean, all these are suffering, you know, in terms of revenue and people working and everything else. But at some point in time, things will start moving back.
Dennis, excuse me, I just want to, we're at an hour, so we can certainly stay on and continue the conversation, but please feel free to leave if you need to. Thank you again. Robert Brancatelli and Dennis Kushner, Fordham Road Collaborative.
Do we have any more questions? Tom, Mark, Mitch, Perry?
Yeah, Dennis, hey, this is Perry Eustick.
Yeah.
Hey, just obviously, I am in the solar business. I helped you with your home. And there's a lot of talk about electric cars and things like that. And do you have any comments on the solar business in general, residential or commercial? Has anything crossed your desk that would stand out, or, you know, is it just going to continue to blow up with all this talk about electricity?
What I've heard is that they're going to continue to keep the credits ongoing in 2021 and possibly 2022 to encourage more solarization. Now, in the state of California, for those that don't remember, they passed a law about a year and a half ago that said any new residential structures that are built will have to have solar capability. You remember that, Perry?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh,
That's
definitely. That's a big topic.
Okay? So that's going to continue on. So I think that's going to be there. I think the demand for that, if you have a home, not an apartment building, if you have a home and the price of your electric bill keeps going up and up and up, you have to decide what are you going to do? Can you afford to either buy or lease or do something around solar capability? And everybody's going to be faced with that decision. And I think that's positive.
Anything with SDG&E, I know it seems like every time that I'm working with a homeowner or whatever, SDG&E has something coming up trying to just make it more and more difficult.
They're talking about 15. I heard from a fellow that just left working there that they're looking at raising electric rates this year 15 to 17%. And that's to offset the lost revenue for people like me buying solar. So I'm saying, there's a battle going on. And so it remains to be seen what's going to happen. But if you decide, Mr. Ruckman, to buy a Tesla or some other electric vehicle, and you have to decide what is the impact going to be from charging that car on a monthly basis. I mean, the rates are going to go through the ceiling. I'm serious.
Right. Yeah.
So that's
okay.
That's it. So
thank you, Dennis. Thank you very much. Once again, great report. I appreciate your time.
Thanks. Mitch, any questions on your part? Mitch is from back east in New Jersey.
No questions, Dennis. Great job as always. A good Q&A with you guys. Very, very informative.
Good. And Bill Holtzman from Silicon Valley. You're on mute, Bill. But anyway, I think in general, things are getting better. I know that in California, we're struggling with vaccine right now. We're behind. And I think what I've heard is we've lost 2 days, so people are going to be notified. They're going to have to wait 2 extra days to get their second shot. So we're seeing that happening. But I'm hoping that Johnson & Johnson's product will be out shortly, be able to immunize more people. So it's all positive. Bruce, you have any thoughts?
Yes, I have two thoughts. Having been the CFO of clean tech companies, we were talking about the electric cars and all that, but going back, what's the motivation for all that? The motivation for all that, excuse me, is saving from carbon. I think it depends on where you live. If you live in upstate New York and using hydroelectric may make sense, but where we live here, there's a power plant up by Huntington Beach, with that big smokestack, burning oil to produce electricity and losing efficiency in the transmission getting to your car. Are you really saving carbon rather than driving a Prius, like I do, and just burning it at the source? The other comment I had is, I think we all remember high inflation rates, and I'm looking at what's going to happen in 2 or 3 years. And I don't see any way around from inflation coming back. The problem with inflation coming back during that time frame is going to be, how is the federal government going to service that higher interest rate on the debt?
Yep.
So I guess my first was a comment. If your motivation is reduce carbon, are you really reducing carbon by driving electric cars in this area? And the second comment is, I don't see any other way around this high inflation, because if you had high inflation at 10% for 5 years, you just cut the deficit in half.
Yep. Well, I can tell you right now, with money, with interest rates low, the good news is, with interest rates low as they are right now, it helps the government in terms of moving money around. Now, if you're a company and you want to buy company B and it involves cash deals and everything, you're paying pretty low interest rates. So now is the right time to be buying other companies or doing whatever you're going to do.
Absolutely.
Forget about the mortgage rates for homes and everything. I mean, at some point in time, it will go back up. But I think at this point, with cheap money, you're going to see a lot of acquisition taking place. You've got a lot of small companies, beyond startup, that are struggling, and what they're doing, they're lining up at Cisco and they're lining up at Oracle, and they're saying, buy my company. They can't get any more venture capital money, because the problem is it's all about organic growth. It's just not happening. So the alternative is, you can't go public because the cost of Sarbanes-Oxley and everything else is huge. So what's the alternative? Well, you want to sell the company or merge with somebody else. So that's what we're faced with. So I guess we're kind of out of town. Does anybody else have any last questions at all before we conclude today? Well, I'd like to thank everybody for being on board with Robert and I today. We're going to do this again in March. The good news is March is a longer month. We'll be able to have more data. So again, thanks guys for being on board today, everybody, for being with us today. Hope you enjoyed our program.
Thanks, Denny.
Really did.
Thanks, Dennis. Well done, sir. Good information.
Great job.
And I'll see you, Dan, on Tuesday.
Yep.
Okay.
We'll talk before that.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.